Hey everyone! Today we're going to actually talk about classes and objects. So, what are classes and what are objects? And exactly what is object oriented programming? So, let's write a little bit of code. All right. So, things that we are familiar with are things like this. Let's see. We have ints, integers. For example, I can give an integer a value. I can also go and create a string. For example, I can say happy and I can do other types of data. For example, I can make a char and I can put some character in there. I can also go and make a decimal number like this and put some value here, which has some maybe a fraction possibly. And what else do we know? We also know booleans. Booleans can be true or false. So if you've never learned booleans, that's okay. You might learn them in future. So for example, boolean is rainy is true. If it is rainy, you can set it to true. Otherwise, you can set it to false. Okay. And here these values are not in quotation marks. Just making sure in case you've not done booleans. All right. Now, all of these data types that you see over here, these are all things that you have learned. But let's think about in the real world, you don't just talk about numbers or single characters or strings. For example, if you're writing an application for uh, listing all the homes that are for sale in your area, then you're talking about a home, right? Or different homes. If you're writing an application for your school that helps them enroll students, the kinds of things that you want to code or talk about are students, right? So the objects or the types of data that you want to deal with are somewhat bigger. They are not simply primitive types like integers, chars, doubles, and booleans. They're also not objects like strings, but they're a little bit more. So let's go ahead and take a simple example. Let's go ahead and write a new type of data and create our own type of data that will represent a student. To do that in Java, you go ahead and you create something known as a class. So we say class student. Now, once you've made a class, you can go and create objects of this type. So for example, the same way you are writing string s is equal to happy, you can go and create a new object like this. You can say student, maybe Sam is equal to new student. When you're learning about classes and objects, you will learn a few new things. One of those new things is the keyword new. New is used in order to create a new object. What is an object? Well, an object is basically a type of data which is not a primitive type. Very often, primitive types are not talked about in terms of objects. Strings can be talked about in terms of objects or any data type that you create, like I just did. I just created a student data type and I'm going and creating a specific variable or a specific object, or very often it is also known as object or instance. It is an instance of the class student. All right. A class acts like the blueprint or the design. It says, hey, by the way, you can have a student type of object, and we'll also learn how to add specific fields to it. But before we do that, let's actually move on ahead and make one more class. How about we'll also design that class that is used in order to represent homes. So the class home will represent, you remember I said, hey, we can write an application to list all the homes in your neighborhood that are for sale. So you can build a class called home. And here I can go ahead and make an object called home. And this time I can say something like home1 is equal to new home. I can also make another home like this. Home2 is equal to new home. All right, now I have two instances, home1 and home2 of type home. I have one instance, Sam, which is of type student in my code. I can make one more also. You can make as many as you like. Nobody is stopping you. Student, maybe I'll just say student 2 because I am not feeling very imaginative. So here we go. So now we have student 2. All right. And now we have two instances of student class and two instances of home class. Most likely, you will have these in different types of coding scenarios. However, I'm kind of building two very different classes together so you kind of get an idea. All right. Now, let's see some other interesting things about classes. But before we do that, I'm going to actually get rid of this code because we don't really need it. I'm going to kind of do this, and that gives us a little bit more space. All right. Now, simply building a blank class isn't really exciting. So let's talk about what a student usually is represented by. Well, if you're talking about a student, most likely you will need a name for that student, which will most likely be a string. You might also have some other things that represent a student, possibly a grade. For example, you could have values from 0 to 12 to indicate 0 for kindergarten and 12th for 12th grade, right? So something like that. And for a home, what are some of the things that could be things that you have for a home? For a home, maybe you have the number of rooms. So it could be an integer. It could also have some sort of maybe a string address, right? Like, hey, this is on so and so street and so something. It might also have some sort of string which represents either the state it's in or the city that it's in and things like that. So you could have a few fields that represent a home, maybe a type of home, whether it is single family or it is a condo and things like that. So, of course, I'm not going to build out every field that represents a home, but you get the idea. All right, so these things that we just wrote over here are used as properties of these objects, right? So a student is represented by two properties, their name and grade. The correct terminology for these, there are several words that I use very often. These are the words that I used for these: attributes, which actually means properties, or you can call them fields of a class, attributes of a class or of an object, or you can say they are instance variables. All right. Or you could also call them, what else could you call them? Properties. Yes. So that's what you could also call them, properties. So all of these are name and grade are two fields on the class student, or you can say they are two attributes of these objects or two attributes of the class. The correct terms, these are all the right terms, and they are very often used interchangeably. All right. For home, very similarly, rooms, address, and city are three fields or attributes or instance variables or properties of the home class or of each of these um, objects. All right. So this is just a little bit of introduction into what are attributes and fields and what are classes. Well, in future, we're going to talk a little bit more about what are other things that you can do with these classes and objects. But for now, I think this is a good place to stop, and feel free to think about some real world application that you might be building for some scenario or a website or something like that. Maybe you're listing all the products of a shop. What kinds of classes would you need for that type of scenario, and what attributes would be part of those classes? So that's actually a really fun exercise to do. And if you think of those, you can code them up and just kind of get your imagination going, and you can build something really cool. All right. Thank you.